She threw me out of my own grandson's birthday party because I didn't look rich enough to belong there. What she didn't know was that I owned the company she bragged about working for. And the next morning, I made sure she started at the very bottom. She built a billion-dollar company from nothing. But if you saw her on the street, you would never guess it. Eleanor Hayes preferred it that way. At 63, she had long since stopped caring about appearances. Her wardrobe consisted mostly of neutral-colored suits, comfortable shoes, and the same silver watch she had worn for over 20 years.
No diamonds, no designer labels.
No need to impress anyone, because everyone who mattered already knew exactly who she was. As the founder and CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country, Eleanor had spent 4 decades building something most people only dreamed of. She started in a one-room office with outdated computers, surviving on instant coffee and sleepless nights. Back then, no one took her seriously. A woman in tech. Too quiet. Too reserved. Too ordinary. They were wrong about all of it. Eleanor didn't speak loudly, but when she did, people listened. Not because of fear, but because of precision. Every decision she made was calculated. Every risk, intentional. She didn't chase attention. She built results. And over time, results became power. Yet strangely, the more successful she became, the simpler her life looked from the outside. While other executives flaunted luxury cars and penthouse apartments, Eleanor kept the same modest home she had lived in for years. She still drove herself to work, still made her own tea in the mornings, still believed that respect had nothing to do with wealth. It was a belief shaped long before success. Eleanor had grown up in a small town where her parents worked long hours just to make ends meet. Her mother cleaned houses. Her father repaired machinery in a factory that barely paid enough to keep the lights on. From them, she learned something that would stay with her forever. You can lose money. You can lose status. But the way you treat people, that's who you really are. She never forgot those words. Not when investors doubted her. Not when competitors tried to push her out. And certainly not when she built a company large enough to influence thousands of lives. But if there was one place where her principles felt tested the most, it wasn't in boardrooms or negotiations. It was at home. Her son, Daniel, had grown up watching her build everything from the ground up. Unlike his mother, he was warm, easygoing, and eager to avoid conflict. Eleanor often wondered if she had protected him too much from the harder parts of life. Still, he was kind. And for a long time, she believed kindness would be enough. Then he married Vanessa Clark. At first, Eleanor tried to keep an open mind. Vanessa was intelligent, polished, and undeniably confident. The kind of woman who walked into a room as if she already owned it. She dressed impeccably, spoke fluently about business, and seemed to understand the world Eleanor had spent decades navigating. But there was something else, too. Something harder to name. In small moments, subtle glances, careless remarks, the way she spoke to waiters or assistants, Eleanor noticed a pattern. Vanessa didn't just value success. She ranked people by it. And those she considered beneath her barely existed at all. Eleanor said nothing. Not yet. Because after a lifetime of building empires, she understood something most people didn't. Character doesn't reveal itself in grand moments. It reveals itself quietly. In how someone treats those they believe have nothing to offer. Daniel Hayes had always been the kind of man people trusted easily. He smiled often, listened more than he spoke, avoided arguments whenever possible. Growing up, Eleanor used to think those traits made him strong in a quiet way, steady, dependable, kind. But as he got older, she began to notice something else hidden beneath that gentleness. He didn't just avoid conflict. He avoided choosing sides. And that difference, though subtle, would matter more than either of them realized. Daniel met Vanessa Clark at a networking event hosted by one of the company's partner firms. At the time, he had just stepped into a mid-level management role, comfortable, but far from the pressure and responsibility Eleanor carried. Vanessa, on the other hand, stood out immediately. She didn't wait for opportunities. She positioned herself in front of them. That night, she wore a sharp black dress, her posture confident, her voice precise. She spoke about market trends, leadership strategy, and growth projections with a fluency that impressed nearly everyone around her, including Daniel. Within weeks, they were inseparable. Within a year, they were married. To most people, they looked like a perfect match: ambitious, successful, modern. Vanessa quickly secured a role within Eleanor's company, entering through a recommendation from a senior executive who had been thoroughly convinced by her polished demeanor. Eleanor didn't interfere. She believed in merit. If Vanessa could prove herself, she deserved her place. And at first, it seemed like she might. Vanessa was efficient, organized, assertive in meetings. She knew how to present ideas in ways that attracted attention and approval. Promotions came quickly, not because she worked harder than others, but because she understood how to be seen. But Eleanor wasn't watching her presentations. She was watching everything else. The way Vanessa spoke to receptionists when she thought no one important was listening. The way she dismissed junior staff with a flick of her hand. The way her tone shifted depending on who stood in front of her, warm for executives, cold for everyone else. It was subtle, carefully hidden, but unmistakable. At family dinners, the pattern became even clearer. Vanessa would compliment the house, but only in comparison to something better she had seen. She would praise a meal, but always add what could have been improved. She spoke about people the way others spoke about objects, measuring value, assigning worth, deciding who mattered and who didn't. Eleanor remained quiet through all of it, not because she didn't see, but because she was waiting to understand whether this was immaturity or something deeper. One evening, during a small family gathering, Eleanor watched as Vanessa casually waved off a server who had brought the wrong drink. "It's fine," Vanessa said, her voice light, but her eyes impatient. "Just try to pay attention next time." The young woman apologized quickly, her cheeks flushing as she hurried away. Daniel didn't react. He simply continued his conversation as if nothing had happened. Eleanor's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer than usual. That was when she understood. Vanessa's behavior wasn't the only problem. Daniel's silence was part of it. Still, Eleanor said nothing, because she had learned something over the years, something experience had carved into her understanding of people. You cannot teach respect through words alone. Some lessons require experience. And sometimes, life has a way of arranging those lessons at exactly the right moment. The invitation arrived a week in advance. Embossed, elegant, impossible to ignore. Vanessa had planned everything down to the smallest detail. The venue was one of the most exclusive event spaces in the city, a place usually reserved for corporate galas and high-profile celebrations. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings so high they made every guest feel smaller beneath them. Soft golden lighting reflected off polished marble floors. Every table was decorated with precision: white roses, silver accents, personalized name cards. Nearly 300 guests, business partners, influencers,
Colleagues.
and of course, family. It was their son's 8th birthday. Eleanor stood in her bedroom that evening, adjusting the sleeve of her simple navy coat. She had received the invitation like everyone else, though hers had arrived without a personal note. No call, no message, just a card. Still, she prepared carefully. Not to impress, but out of respect. She chose a modest dress, brushed her hair neatly back, and fastened her old silver watch around her wrist. The same one she had worn through decades of meetings, negotiations, and long nights building her company. To her, it was more valuable than anything money could buy. When she arrived at the venue, the entrance was already crowded with guests stepping out of luxury cars, laughter echoing softly into the night air. A uniformed security guard stood near the door, checking names against a list. Eleanor approached calmly. "Good evening," she said. The guard glanced down at his clipboard, scanning quickly. Then again. His expression shifted slightly, uncertain. "I'm sorry, ma'am, could you repeat your name?" "Eleanor Hayes." He checked once more. A pause. "I don't seem to have you here." Eleanor's brow lifted slightly, not in anger, but in quiet surprise. "That's all right," she said gently. "Perhaps there's been a mistake." Before the guard could respond, a familiar voice cut through the air behind him. "There's no mistake." Eleanor looked up. Vanessa stepped forward, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She looked flawless, draped in a designer gown, every detail of her appearance carefully curated. Her smile was polite, but her eyes were not. "She's not on the list," Vanessa continued, her tone calm, controlled. "Please don't make this difficult." For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Guests moved around them, conversations flowing, music drifting faintly from inside the ballroom. The celebration continued, uninterrupted. Eleanor studied her daughter-in-law's face. Not for anger, not for cruelty, but for something else. Understanding. It wasn't there. "Vanessa," Eleanor said quietly, "I'm here for my grandson." Vanessa tilted her head slightly, as if considering something insignificant. "And this event," she replied, "is for invited guests." The words were delivered with perfect composure, carefully chosen, deliberately sharp. The guard shifted uncomfortably beside them, unsure where to look. Eleanor remained still. "You don't understand," Vanessa added softly, lowering her voice just enough to sound polite, but not enough to hide the edge beneath it. "This is a professional environment. We have standards." "Standards?" Eleanor let the words settle between them. Then she nodded once. "I see."
No argument. No explanation.
No revelation of who she was. She simply turned and walked away. Behind her, the doors opened again, laughter spilling out into the night, bright and effortless. The party continued as if nothing had happened. But as Eleanor stepped into the quiet darkness beyond the lights, something inside her shifted. Not anger, not humiliation, something colder, clearer. Because in that moment, she realized something with absolute certainty. Vanessa hadn't made a mistake. She had made a decision. And decisions, unlike words, always come with consequences. The drive home was quiet, not the kind of quiet that brings peace, but the kind that sharpens every thought, every memory, every detail you might otherwise ignore. Eleanor didn't turn on the radio. She didn't check her phone. The city lights passed by in long streaks across the windshield as she kept her eyes fixed on the road, her hands steady on the wheel. She replayed the moment in her mind. Not the words, the tone, the certainty. Vanessa hadn't hesitated, hadn't doubted, hadn't even considered the possibility that she might be wrong. That was what lingered. Not disrespect, but conviction. When Eleanor reached home, she stepped inside without turning on all the lights. The house was still familiar. The same quiet space she had returned to for years after long days of negotiations and decisions that affected thousands of people. Tonight, it felt different. She set her keys down carefully on the table and removed her coat, folding it with the same deliberate precision she applied to everything in her life.
No sudden movements. No visible emotion.
But inside, something had already settled into place. She walked into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. The sound of it filling the glass echoed softly in the silence. Then she sat down, not to rest, to think. Eleanor had spent decades making decisions under pressure. She had faced aggressive competitors, economic downturns, internal crises, situations where reacting emotionally would have cost her everything.
So she didn't react.
She evaluated. Vanessa's behavior wasn't new. Tonight had simply removed the last layer of disguise. This wasn't insecurity. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was belief. A belief that status determined value, that appearance defined worth, that power meant the right to dismiss others. Eleanor exhaled slowly. Across the room, her phone lit up briefly. A message. From Daniel. *, Mom, I hope you're okay. Vanessa said there was some confusion at the entrance. *. Eleanor stared at the screen for a moment. Confusion. The word almost made her smile. Not because it was funny, because it was convenient. She picked up the phone, her fingers hovering briefly before typing a short reply.
Asterisco ai fine.
Enjoy the party. *. Nothing more.
No accusation. No explanation.
She placed the phone back down. That, too, was a decision. Because Eleanor understood something Daniel did not. Silence, when chosen deliberately, is not weakness. It is control. She leaned back slightly in her chair, her gaze steady, her thoughts aligning with the same clarity she brought into every boardroom she had ever walked into. If this had happened inside her company, if an employee had treated someone this way, there would have been consequences. Immediate ones. Not out of anger, but out of principle. And principle, to Eleanor, was not flexible. It didn't bend for family. It didn't soften for comfort. It either existed or it didn't. For a long moment, she sat there in the quiet, letting the weight of the situation settle into something solid, something actionable. Because now the question was no longer what happened. The question was, what needed to be done about it? And Eleanor Hayes had never built an empire by ignoring answers she already knew. The next morning, Eleanor arrived at the office earlier than usual, not because she needed to, but because clarity often came in quiet moments before the noise of meetings, emails, and decisions filled the day. The building stood exactly as it always had, glass walls reflecting the pale morning light, employees moving in and out with purpose, unaware that anything had changed. But something had. Eleanor stepped through the lobby without announcement, acknowledging the receptionist with a small nod. The young woman smiled warmly, unaware that she was being noticed for more than just politeness. Eleanor noticed everything. She always had. By the time she reached her private office on the top floor, the city had fully awakened beneath her. From here, she could see everything. Traffic flowing like veins through the streets, people moving in patterns that seemed chaotic but weren't. Systems. Everything was a system. And systems only worked when accountability existed. She placed her bag on the desk, removed her coat, and sat down. For a moment she did nothing. Just looked out the window, her expression calm, composed. Then she reached for her phone. One call. That was all it took. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady. On the other end, the head of human resources responded immediately, tone respectful, alert. "Good morning, Ms. Hayes. I need you to review an internal reassignment," Eleanor continued. Effective immediately. There was no hesitation in her voice. No explanation offered. Just direction. "Yes, of course," HR replied. "Which department?" Eleanor paused for a fraction of a second, not because she was unsure, but because she was precise. "Vanessa Clark," she said. Another pause on the line. Not long. Just enough to register recognition. "I want her reassigned to facilities operations," Eleanor added. "Cafeteria division." Silence. A longer one this time. Not confusion, but surprise. "Is there a specific reason for the reassignment?" HR asked carefully. Eleanor leaned back slightly in her chair. "Yes," she replied. But she didn't elaborate. Because reasons in her world didn't need to be explained in detail to be understood. "Make it immediate," she continued.
No delay. No exceptions."
Understood. The call ended. Eleanor set the phone down gently, her fingers resting against the desk for a brief moment. This wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was correction. Because Vanessa had made one critical mistake, one that couldn't be ignored, especially not within a system Eleanor had spent her entire life building. She believed some people didn't matter. So Eleanor would show her exactly what it meant to be treated that way. Not through words, through experience. Across the building, the shift happened quickly. An email, a notification, a change in status. Vanessa Clark, Corporate Strategy Associate, reassigned to cafeteria operations.
Temporary.
Officially. But in reality, nothing about this was temporary. Eleanor stood and walked toward the window again, her reflection faintly visible against the glass. Some lessons, she knew, could not be taught in boardrooms. They had to be lived. And for the first time in a long while, Eleanor wasn't waiting to see what would happen. She had already set it in motion. Vanessa noticed the change before anyone said a word. It started with the silence. When she walked into the office that morning, something felt off. The conversations that usually paused to include her didn't pause at all. People who normally greeted her with polite enthusiasm suddenly seemed preoccupied, their attention fixed on screens, papers, anything but her. At first, she assumed it was nothing. A busy morning. A shift in mood. Then she opened her email. The subject line was simple. Department reassignment, effective immediately. For a moment, she thought it was a mistake. Her eyes scanned the message once.
Twice.
A third time, slower now. Her name. Her position. Her new assignment. Cafeteria operations. Vanessa let out a short, incredulous laugh under her breath. No, she murmured, shaking her head slightly. That's not possible. She checked the sender. Human resources. Official. Final. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard as she opened her employee portal, expecting to find an error, a glitch, anything that would explain the absurdity of what she was seeing. But the system reflected the same thing. Her title, gone. Her department, changed. Her access level, reduced. The reality settled in slowly, like something unwelcome but undeniable. Someone had done this. Deliberately. Vanessa pushed her chair back sharply and stood, ignoring the glances now openly directed toward her. She walked straight out of her office, heels striking the floor with controlled urgency. This has to be corrected, she said under her breath. Because in her world, things like this didn't happen. Not to her. She went directly to HR. The manager greeted her with a neutral expression, professional, careful. There's been a mistake, Vanessa said immediately, placing her phone on the desk and turning the screen toward him. I need this fixed. The manager glanced at the email, then back at her. There's no mistake, he replied calmly. Vanessa blinked, her composure tightening. Excuse me? The reassignment was authorized, he continued. It's effective as of this morning. Authorized by who? She demanded. A pause. Then, executive leadership. The words hung in the air. Vanessa's jaw tightened slightly. That doesn't make any sense, she said, her voice lowering. Not softer, but sharper. I'm in corporate strategy. I have ongoing projects. You can't just move me into this. She didn't say the word. She didn't have to. The manager held her gaze evenly. It's not a demotion, he said. It's a reassignment. Vanessa let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it now. Right, she said. Of course. But her eyes had changed. The confidence was still there. But underneath it, something unsettled had begun to surface. Because for the first time in a long while, Vanessa wasn't in control of the narrative. She picked up her phone and straightened.
Fine, she said.
Then I'll speak to whoever made this decision. The manager didn't respond. He didn't need to, because both of them understood something Vanessa was only just beginning to realize. This decision hadn't been made lightly. And more importantly, it hadn't been made by someone she could easily challenge. Still, Vanessa turned and walked out, her posture rigid, her steps precise. She would fix this. She always fixed things. But as she made her way toward the elevator, one thought pressed quietly into her mind. Not fear. Not yet. Just a question. Who had the authority to do this to her? Vanessa had never stepped into the cafeteria before. Not really. She had passed by it countless times, glancing through the glass doors, barely registering the space beyond. To her, it had always been part of the background. Functional. Invisible. Now it was her destination. The moment she walked in, the shift was immediate. The air felt different. Warmer. Louder. The sharp, polished silence of executive floors replaced by the clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation, the constant motion of people working without pause. For a brief second, she just stood there,
taking it in.
Then someone approached her, a middle-aged supervisor with a clipboard and a tired but steady expression. You must be Vanessa, the woman said. Vanessa straightened slightly.
Yes.
I'm here because of a reassignment. There's clearly been. We've been informed, the woman interrupted gently. Not rude. Not apologetic. Just factual. She handed Vanessa a uniform. A simple apron. Neutral-colored.
Plain.
Unremarkable. Vanessa stared at it. I'm not wearing that. The woman didn't react. That's required, she replied calmly. Health and safety regulations. Vanessa let out a small breath, her patience thinning. This is temporary, she said. I'll have this sorted out by the end of the day. The woman nodded once. Of course. But there was something in her tone, not agreement, not disbelief. Just experience. Vanessa hesitated for a moment longer, then took the apron between her fingers as if it were something foreign. Something that didn't belong to her. Which, in her mind, it didn't. She tied it on. Awkwardly. Uncomfortably. And just like that, everything changed. Her first task was simple. Washing dishes. Trays stacked high beside the sink. Plates with leftover food. Glasses smeared with fingerprints. Utensils piled in tangled heaps. Vanessa stood there, staring at the sink, waiting, as if someone might step in and correct the situation. No one did. Water's there, the supervisor said, gesturing. Detergent on the left. Just keep things moving. Just keep things moving. Vanessa turned on the faucet. The rush of water filled the space between her thoughts. She picked up a plate, scrubbed it, set it aside. Another, and another. Minutes passed, then more. The rhythm became unavoidable, repetitive, unseen. People moved around her constantly, taking orders, carrying trays, wiping tables, but no one stopped to acknowledge her. No one cared who she was. No one adjusted their behavior in her presence. For the first time in years, she was just another worker. At one point, a young employee hurried past her, placing another stack of dishes beside the sink without making eye contact. Need these done quickly, he said. Not unkind. Just direct. Vanessa looked at the pile. Then at him. He had already walked away. Something tightened in her chest. Not quite anger. Not quite embarrassment. Something unfamiliar. Because this feeling of being overlooked, dismissed, reduced to function, was something she had never allowed herself to experience. And yet, it was exactly how she had treated others. But Vanessa didn't reflect on that. Not yet. Instead, she clenched her jaw slightly, her movements becoming sharper, faster. This wasn't a lesson. This was an inconvenience. A mistake. Something temporary. Something beneath her. She would endure it, fix it, and return to where she belonged. At least, that's what she told herself. But across the room, unnoticed by everyone else, a quiet camera in the corner recorded everything. And far above, in a glass-walled office overlooking the city, Eleanor Hayes watched in silence. Not with satisfaction, not with anger, but with focus. Because this wasn't about punishment. It was about truth. And the truth had a way of revealing itself when titles disappeared. Days turned into a routine Vanessa had never imagined herself living. Morning shift, apron, sink, dishes. At first, she kept checking her phone between tasks, expecting an email, a call, some urgent correction that would restore everything back to normal. Nothing came.
No apology. No clarification. No reversal.
Just silence. And work. By the third day, the physical discomfort began to settle in. Her hands, once manicured and carefully maintained, grew dry from constant exposure to water and detergent. The soft rhythm of typing on a keyboard had been replaced by the harsh scrape of plates and the repetitive motion of scrubbing.
It was exhausting.
Not intellectually, but physically. And worse, it was invisible. No one praised her. No one acknowledged her effort. No one cared how well she did. The trays kept coming. The dishes never stopped. At one point, she overheard two employees talking nearby. Did you see the new girl? One of them said quietly.
Yeah.
She's slow. Vanessa's hands paused for just a fraction of a second. Slow?
Her jaw tightened.
She wanted to turn around, to correct them, to remind them who she was, what she had achieved, where she belonged. But something stopped her. Not humility. Not yet. Something else. Because for the first time, saying who she was wouldn't change anything. So she said nothing. And kept washing. From above, Eleanor continued to observe. Not constantly, but enough. Enough to understand. Enough to confirm what she had already suspected. She watched Vanessa interact with others, briefly, reluctantly, often with restrained irritation. She noticed the lack of eye contact, the clipped responses, the subtle tension in her posture whenever someone gave her instructions. Vanessa followed orders. But she didn't accept them. There was no shift in perspective.
No curiosity. No empathy.
Only resistance. Eleanor leaned back slightly in her chair, her gaze steady as she reviewed the footage from earlier that morning. There had been a moment.
A small one.
A younger employee had accidentally dropped a tray near the sink, dishes clattering loudly across the floor. The girl froze, clearly embarrassed, her face flushing as she scrambled to pick everything up. Vanessa had been standing right there, close enough to help, close enough to say something. She didn't. She stepped back instead, just slightly, just enough to avoid getting involved. Then turned away. Eleanor exhaled slowly. That was the moment. Not dramatic, not obvious, but definitive. Because change, real change, often reveals itself in instinct, not in performance. And Vanessa's instinct hadn't changed at all. Later that afternoon, Vanessa stood by the sink again, her movements slower now, more controlled. But her thoughts were louder. This wasn't teaching her anything. This wasn't fair. This wasn't deserved. The same words circled in her mind again and again, reinforcing what she already believed. She wasn't learning. She was enduring. And in her mind, those were not the same thing. Upstairs, Eleanor reached for her phone once more. Her decision had already been forming. Now it was clear. This was no longer about observation. It was time for confrontation. Not to punish, not to argue, but to reveal. Because some people don't change when life shows them a mirror. They only change when someone forces them to look directly into it. By the end of the week, the message finally came. Not an email, not a warning, a summons. Vanessa found it waiting in her inbox during her break. Short, formal, unmistakable. Report to executive office. 3 p.m.
No explanation. No signature.
Just authority. She stared at the screen for a moment, her pulse quickening slightly, not with fear, but with anticipation. Finally, this was it. Whoever had made the decision was ready to face her. Vanessa removed her apron slowly, folding it with more care than she had expected of herself. Her reflection in the stainless steel surface beside the sink caught her attention briefly. She looked different. Not weaker, but less polished, less controlled. She turned away before thinking too much about it. This wasn't about reflection. This was about correction. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. Each floor she passed brought her closer to something she had been waiting for all week, a chance to reclaim her position, to reassert control, to remind whoever was responsible that mistakes like this had consequences. Her posture straightened as the doors opened onto the executive level. Silence greeted her. Not the noisy, functional hum of the lower floors, but a quiet, controlled environment where every detail felt intentional. This was where decisions were made. Real ones. A receptionist looked up as Vanessa approached. "They're expecting you," she said, her tone polite but measured. Vanessa nodded and continued forward, her heels echoing softly against the polished floor. At the end of the hallway stood a single door.
Closed.
Unmarked, but unmistakably important. Vanessa paused for just a second, then knocked.
Come in.
The voice was calm.
Familiar.
But she couldn't quite place it. She pushed the door open. The office was larger than she expected, but not extravagant. Minimalist.
Clean.
Every object in its place, every surface uncluttered. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city, casting soft light across the room. And, behind the desk, sat Eleanor Hayes. For a moment, Vanessa didn't move. Her mind tried to process what she was seeing, but the pieces didn't fit. The simple clothes, the quiet presence, the woman she had dismissed at the door just days ago, now sitting at the center of everything. "No," Vanessa said under her breath, almost instinctively. Eleanor didn't react. She simply gestured toward the chair across from her. "Sit down, Vanessa." The tone wasn't harsh. It didn't need to be. It carried something else. Authority. Real authority. Vanessa remained standing for a second longer, her expression tightening as realization began to form, slowly, unwillingly. "You," she began, her voice losing some of its usual precision. "You work here?" Eleanor held her gaze steadily. I do, she replied. A pause. Then, I built it. Silence filled the room. Heavy. Unavoidable. Vanessa's confidence didn't disappear, but it shifted. Cracked. Just slightly. Because suddenly, the question that had been circling in her mind all week had an answer. And it was far more dangerous than she had expected. Eleanor folded her hands calmly on the desk. I believe, she said, her voice even, controlled. You've been looking for me. Vanessa didn't sit. Not immediately. Her eyes moved across the room, then back to Eleanor, as if searching for something that would make this make sense. But there was nothing to reinterpret. No assistant stepping in. No clarification coming. Just the quiet, undeniable truth standing in front of her. You're the CEO? She said finally, the words slower now, heavier than anything she had said all week. Eleanor didn't nod, didn't confirm with pride. She simply held Vanessa's gaze. Yes. That was all.
No explanation. No embellishment.
And somehow, that made it worse. Vanessa let out a short breath, her mind racing, replaying moments, reordering assumptions, reconstructing everything she thought she understood.
The party.
The entrance. The way Eleanor had stood there calm, composed, saying nothing. And she, Vanessa's jaw tightened. You could have said something, she said, her voice sharpening slightly as she stepped forward. At the party. You could have told me who you were. Eleanor's expression didn't change. That wouldn't have changed your behavior, she replied. The answer landed cleanly. Without emotion. Without hesitation. Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, then stopped. Because she knew. Deep down, she knew it was true. Eleanor leaned back slightly in her chair, her posture relaxed but deliberate. Do you know why you're here? She asked. Vanessa crossed her arms. I was reassigned without cause, she said. And I expect that to be corrected. Not an apology. Not a question. A demand. Eleanor studied her for a moment, not judging. Observing. No, she said calmly. You were reassigned with very clear cause. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Because of a misunderstanding at a private event? She said. That has nothing to do with my performance at work. Eleanor shook her head once. It has everything to do with it. Silence. Eleanor's voice remained steady. In this company, she continued, people are not valued based on how visible they are, or how powerful they appear. They are valued based on how they treat others.
Consistently.
Especially when no one is watching. Vanessa let out a quiet, incredulous laugh. You moved me to wash dishes, she said. That's not a lesson. That's punishment. Eleanor didn't respond immediately. She let the words settle. Then, it's a reflection. Vanessa frowned. A reflection of what? Eleanor's eyes held hers, clear, unwavering. Of how you treat people you believe are beneath you. The room went still. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered across Vanessa's face. Not acceptance, but impact. Eleanor continued. I watched you this week, she said. Not your work. Your behavior. Vanessa's posture shifted slightly. You followed instructions, Eleanor added. But you didn't change. You didn't learn. You didn't see anyone around you as equal. Only as temporary obstacles. That's not true, Vanessa snapped. Eleanor didn't raise her voice. Then tell me, she said quietly, when someone needed help, why didn't you step forward? Vanessa hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. Eleanor leaned forward slightly now, her tone still calm, but sharper. Respect is not a performance, she said. It's not something you turn on when it benefits you. Her next words landed slowly, deliberately. It's who you are when you believe no one important is watching. Vanessa said nothing, because for the first time since she walked into the room, she wasn't arguing. She was listening, and Eleanor could see it. But she also knew, listening wasn't the same as understanding. Not yet. Vanessa left the office without another word. Not because she had accepted what Eleanor said, but because she didn't yet know how to respond to it. The hallway outside felt different now. Quieter. Heavier. Each step she took echoed more sharply than before, as if the building itself had shifted around her. She reached the elevator and pressed the button, her reflection staring back at her from the mirrored surface. For the first time in a long while, she didn't recognize the version of herself looking back. That evening, Daniel was waiting when she got home. He was sitting at the dining table, his phone untouched in front of him, his posture tense in a way Vanessa had rarely seen before. "You went to see her," he said. It wasn't a question. Vanessa placed her bag down slowly. "Yes." A pause. Daniel looked up at her, his expression conflicted, frustration mixed with something deeper. "She told me everything." Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly. "Of course she did." "That's not the point," Daniel replied, his voice tightening. "Is it true?" Vanessa didn't answer immediately. Not because she didn't have an answer, but because, for the first time, the answer wasn't simple. "She overreacted," Vanessa said finally. "It was a misunderstanding." Daniel stared at her. "A misunderstanding?" he repeated. "You had my mother removed from our son's birthday party." Vanessa crossed her arms. She showed up uninvited, dressed like... She stopped herself, but it was too late. Daniel's expression changed. Not suddenly, but definitively. "Dressed like what?" he asked quietly. Vanessa looked away. "That's not the point." "No," Daniel said. "It is." The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. Because this wasn't about the party anymore. It wasn't even about Eleanor. It was about something Daniel had avoided seeing for a long time. Now he couldn't ignore it. "I didn't say anything that night," he continued, his voice lower now. "I told myself it wasn't worth the conflict, that it would pass." He let out a slow breath. But it didn't pass. Vanessa didn't respond, because she could feel it. The shift. The same kind of shift that had happened in Eleanor's office. Quiet. Irreversible. "You didn't just disrespect her," Daniel said. "You showed me exactly how you see people." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "That's not fair." Daniel shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "What's not fair is realizing I've been ignoring this for years." The words landed harder than anything Eleanor had said, because they didn't come from authority. They came from someone who had chosen her, and was now questioning that choice. Vanessa stepped forward. "So what?" she said. "You're taking her side now?" Daniel held her gaze. "I'm choosing what's right." The answer was simple, clear, and final. The room fell into silence again, but this time, it didn't feel uncertain. It felt resolved. Because some decisions don't happen in a moment of anger. They happen in a moment of clarity. And once that clarity arrives, there's no going back. "I think," Daniel said slowly, "we need to end this." Vanessa didn't react immediately. Not outwardly, but something inside her shifted. For the second time that day, she realized something she had never truly considered before. Not everything could be controlled. And not every consequence could be undone. The company continued, as it always had. Deadlines were met. Meetings were held. Decisions were made. From the outside, nothing had changed. But inside, something had shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Deliberately. Eleanor stood once again by the window in her office, looking out over the city she had spent decades building her place within. The same streets. The same movement, the same endless rhythm of people chasing something, success, security, recognition. She understood all of it, but she also understood something many of them didn't. None of it meant anything without respect. Behind her, a report lay open on the desk. Performance reviews, internal culture assessments, notes from department leads. Small changes were already happening. Managers paying closer attention to how their teams were treated. Employees speaking more openly. A subtle but undeniable shift towards something Eleanor had always believed in. Equality not as a concept, but as a standard. Daniel visited her a week later. He didn't call ahead. Didn't schedule a meeting. He simply arrived. When he stepped into her office, there was no tension this time. No avoidance. No silence filled with things left unsaid. Just honesty. "I should have said something that night," he said. Eleanor looked at him, not with disappointment, not with anger, with understanding. "Yes," she replied. Daniel nodded slowly. I won't make that mistake again. And this time, she believed him. Because growth, she knew, didn't come from being right. It came from recognizing when you had been wrong and choosing differently. As for Vanessa, she was gone. Not dramatically, not publicly, just absent. Her name removed from systems. Her presence erased from meetings. Her voice no longer part of conversations that once revolved around influence and image. Some people in the company whispered about what had happened. Others didn't. But Eleanor didn't address it, because this had never been about humiliation. It had been about truth. And truth didn't need an audience. Later that evening, Eleanor returned home. The house was quiet, as it always was. But it didn't feel empty. She moved through it slowly, pausing briefly in the living room where framed photos lined the shelves, moments captured across years of effort, sacrifice, and quiet victories. Her hand rested lightly on one frame, a younger version of herself, standing beside a much smaller version of Daniel, smiling, back when everything was simpler, back when lessons didn't need consequences. She exhaled softly, then let her hand fall, because life didn't stay simple. People grew,
Changed.
revealed who they truly were, and sometimes they were given the chance to become better. Before turning off the lights, Eleanor paused for a moment, her thoughts settling into something clear, something final. She had built a company. She had built a life. But more importantly, she had protected the one thing that made both of those things matter. Not power, not status, not success, but principle. And if there was one truth she knew would outlast everything else, it was this. A person's worth is never defined by the position they hold, but by the way they treat the people they believe don't matter at all.